Hi there, I'm Andrew, you're watching ThatGamerAjax, and welcome to the introductory guide to Emberwind's classes. Now, Emberwind is a D20 tabletop role-playing system that plays fairly similar to Dungeons & Dragons, though it focuses a little bit more on tactics and kind of more flexibility than what D&D gives you. Now, rather than doing individual class guides, I wanted to break them into segments as they are described in the game. So today we're going to be focusing on the soldier. Now, every single adventuring party needs a fighter or a soldier of some kind. You gotta have somebody that's in there on the front line doing massive damage with melee weapons and being able to soak up a hit, and that is exactly what these classes do. Now, while these aren't going to be the traditional fighters, which are going to all focus on melee, they offer a wide variety of tactics and debilitating status effects that you can put on your enemies while being able to soak up a decent amount of damage. Now, as a disclaimer, Emberwind is a little bit of a tactics game, and that has a lot of great roleplay moments involved in it. But because of the fluid nature of this game, these are going to be just general recommendations that I think would fit the classes, and feel free to tailor these classes to your own builds if you decide to give this game a shot. First up is the Archer. Now, despite its name, this is a class that is able to fluidly swap between both melee and ranged combat, almost in kind of a very damaging dance, if you will. While putting out a good amount of ranged damage, this is a class that is able to also provide a bit of crowd control and support for some of your other classes. And what you're going to really want to do with this class is focus on kind of keeping that little bit of distance in between yourself and your opponents. Early on, this class also really rewards you for kind of being in the thick of a fight, because if you make a ranged attack on one opponent and then you decide to use one of your traits, such as the Whirling Dervish, you are able to make a melee attack and you get added bonuses to your dodge chance, meaning that when an opponent tries to hit you, you're going to have a much better chance of being able to get out of the way. If you want to see how dodges really work, I'd highly recommend that you check out the actual play that I did with a couple of my friends. We should have a link somewhere around here for you, so that way you can see this in action, because everything is dictated by player roles rather than opponent roles. This is also a class that you don't want to sleep on some of the passive traits. And while you get to select a grand total of 6, this includes your passive. So make sure that you are really keeping an eye on what is available to you early on. This is a class that, kind of gets bonuses to its ranged attacks or crowd control options, such as being able to, make a distracting shot on an opponent from range. When you are picking equipment for the Archer, I would focus on picking equipment that is going to boost your accuracy or your penetration stats. So what I would personally recommend would be look at one-handed or two-handed swords, or even look at maces. What happens when you penetrate in this game is that you ignore an opponent's defenses entirely, so you get to do a lot more damage. If you pick a one-handed weapon, I would highly recommend taking a light shield as your offhanded weapon, because this increases your dodge chances even further, meaning that if an opponent does manage to get to you somehow, they're going to have a much harder time in hitting you. When it comes to picking armor for your class, I would personally recommend light armor. Light armor makes it so that way your dodge chances are increased even further, so you're going to have a much greater chance of being able to get out of the way of those big attacks. Next up is the Rogue, which has never ever heard of a fair fight. Now, pretty similar to Dungeons & Dragons Rogue, Emberwind's Rogue focuses on debilitating status effects through poison and exploiting opponents' general weaknesses. This is a class that you really want to focus on your positioning and being able to kind of get around a battlefield in a very, very quick and speedy manner. Now, the Rogue has a lot of abilities that apply stacks of poison, which can go up to a maximum of 5, and what happens with poison in this game is that it's a constant tick damage. So for every stack up to that maximum of 5, you get to roll an additional d6 of damage at the start of an opponent's turn, and it's just slowly chipping away at their health pools. Now, when you're playing this class, this is another one that you really don't want to sleep on its passives, especially early on, which allow you to really get a lot of extra damage in, sometimes even doing a 1.5 multiplier rather than the usual amount of damage that you do. And early on, especially, any damage that you're putting out makes it so that way your opponent is 1 foot closer in the grave. Some of your other passives also allow you to get extra movement, and in this game, movement is almost everything. It usually costs you a slow action, which is half of what you're able to do in a turn. So any 2 squares that you get to move even further would be like an additional 10 feet of movement if you were playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. When you're picking the traits for your Rogue, you are going to want a high trigger limit. Now, this is a class that really focuses on when a certain person does something, this other thing happens. By having a higher trigger limit, you're able to start doing that a lot more often, and you can do it more each turn. Now, this is one of the classes that I would highly recommend dual wielding weapons with. Now, when it comes to dual wielding, you're going to want probably a sword for that additional accuracy and penetration stat if you want to take it one-handed. And then for your offhand, you're either going to want, something that's smaller like a dagger. Luckily, this is a game that flavor is very important and very big. So you can kind of describe what your offhand weapon is, or you're going to want an offhand crossbow. The offhand crossbow is going to allow you to get free attacks in while you're moving. For a ranged weapon, I would actually really recommend that you take knives because it allows you to get a very quick burst of damage in on an opponent that's not overly far away from you. In terms of armor, I would actually recommend going light or heavy armor depending on the opponents that you think that you're going to be fighting, because that's either going to increase your dodge chance or it's going to increase your toughness, so anytime you take a melee hit while standing next to somebody, you're going to take a little bit less damage. And the last of the soldiers that we have is the warrior. Now, this is the all-out combatant. I would say that it's probably the closest that Emberwind has to a barbarian class. You focus on hitting hard and hitting fast, while taking a little bit of negatives to some of your traits throughout the game, especially once you get into the second tier, third tier, and fourth tiers of play. Now, this is a class that really rewards aggression. You get a whole lot of additional bonuses when it comes to moving towards an opponent or closing the gap. You don't really focus on ranged fighting as much, though you'll still have ranged items in your inventory that you can use. You're really going to want to get up in somebody's face and just hit them with your heaviest hitting abilities. And this is a class that really becomes a balancing act. You're going to have to, be balancing some of the passives that you get along with some of your general class traits, because some of them will actually start making it so that way it's a little bit harder for you to either critically strike or even hit an opponent. So you're really going to have to decide what is going to be the best situation for an upcoming fight, because you're able to swap these traits out on a very regular basis. The warrior really focuses on adding on stacks of vulnerability through heavy hits, and what vulnerability does in Emberwind is it reduces your opponent's general defense ratings, meaning that you and your allies are going to be able to start hitting harder, and they're not going to be able to absorb near as much damage. Now, when it comes to building a warrior, I would personally really recommend focusing on your penetration stat, which is going to make it so that way you are able to start ignoring enemy defenses if you roll that number on your d20 every turn. So what I would really recommend for your weapon would actually be the mace, which gives you additional bonuses for penetration that can be either one or two-handed. And then when it comes to a ranged weapon, I would recommend taking a crossbow, which gives you even further penetration stats. When it comes to picking the armor for your warrior, I would really recommend going heavy armor if you think that you're going to be really in the thick of a fight and taking melee attacks, or if you think you're going to be going up against magical combatants. I would actually recommend swapping over to robes, because that boosts your resistance stat, meaning that you take a little bit less damage from magic. So these are the 3 soldier-style classes in Emberwind. They are a great addition to any kind of party that you could imagine. They focus on doing heavy physical damage and really kind of being nimble, agile, and heavy-hitting combatants. And they have a lot of tactics to their play that make them a little bit more intriguing compared to some of their counterparts in games such as Dungeons & Dragons. So, have you played Emberwind before? Have you ever heard of these classes? Did any of them sound intriguing? Let me know in the comments below, and if you liked the video, don't forget to give it that thumbs up. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about either Dungeons & Dragons or smaller games such as Emberwind or Veil of the Void, don't forget to subscribe. I post videos on a weekly basis. But until next time, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.